Here's Keynote 1 expanded to approximately 500 words for he was my mom's business partner and my secret obsession. #####, Keynote 1. The first encounter, it was the first time I'd seen him in person. Evan, my mom's new business partner. I'd heard so much about him before that moment, all of it secondhand. My mom had been gushing over how he was a brilliant businessman, a visionary, someone who could help take their startup to the next level. He was experienced, driven, and, according to her, exactly the kind of person she needed to work with. I'd heard his name mentioned around the house for weeks. She'd speak about him with this spark in her voice, like she admired him more than just a colleague. But I never really paid attention to any of it until the day I met him. When he walked into the house for our first official meeting, I was stunned. My mom had set up a casual dinner to discuss some upcoming projects, and there he was, tall, with sharp features and dark hair that fell effortlessly into place. He had a kind of presence that filled the room the moment he stepped in. There was a quiet confidence about him, but it was the way he carried himself, like he had the world figured out, that drew me in. His smile was warm, but there was an edge to it, something that suggested there was more beneath the surface, something I couldn't yet understand. I wasn't expecting to feel the immediate pull I did. I had only heard of him, after all, just business talk, endless meetings that didn't really concern me. But when our eyes met across the table, something shifted. He gave me a polite but lingering smile, and I could feel my heart rate pick up. It was as though time slowed for a fraction of a second, and in that brief moment, the world around us became irrelevant. It was just me and him, and whatever this unspoken connection was between us. I couldn't quite place it, but I was aware of it. The way he studied me from across the table with interest, his gaze never quite leaving mine. He wasn't looking at me like a colleague's daughter. There was something deeper there, something that sent an unexpected thrill through me. I quickly turned my attention to my plate, unsure if what I felt was even real, but I couldn't shake it. Throughout the rest of the evening, I found myself sneaking glances at him, unsure if I was imagining the tension building between us. The way his voice sounded when he spoke, smooth, authoritative, and yet laced with an undertone of curiosity that made me feel like he was trying to figure me out. His answers to my mom's questions were thoughtful, but every now and then, he'd look at me with a look I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't flirty, not exactly, but it felt like there was something more beneath it. By the time he left that night, I was conflicted. Part of me wanted to push the feelings down, to dismiss them as a silly crush. He was my mom's partner, after all. It would be wrong, crossing a boundary that didn't even need to exist. But there was another part of me, the part one couldn't control, that wanted more. I found myself wondering what it would be like if we weren't just strangers in passing, if I could get to know him outside of the business meetings and the formalities. But that was the problem. He was my mom's business partner, and the boundaries I was now aware of were ones I couldn't cross. At least, not yet. Here's Keynote 2 expanded to approximately 500 words for he was my mom's business partner and my secret obsession. ####, Keynote 2. The growing obsession, the days that followed that dinner felt strange, as if something had shifted within me that I wasn't ready to confront. Evan's presence lingered long after he left our home. Every time my mom mentioned him, I couldn't help but feel a mix of envy and curiosity. The way she spoke about him, her admiration, her respect, it was almost as if she looked at him with a certain reverence that made my stomach tighten. It didn't help that she kept inviting him over to discuss business matters, or that they would meet at the office every few days. I was almost always in the house when he visited. At first, I tried to ignore it. I focused on my work, or buried myself in a book, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to those moments when our eyes locked. But it wasn't easy. Every time I saw him again, that same electric tension returned. His gaze never quite left mine, and there was always this unspoken understanding that passed between us. A look, a slight smile that lingered too long, just enough to remind me that I was aware of how he was aware of me. I began to notice how he acted around me when my mom wasn't there. It wasn't anything overt. There were no overt gestures, no flirtation. But there was something in the way he treated me differently. The subtle compliments he gave, the way he'd ask how my day was going with genuine interest, or how he'd lean just a little closer when speaking to me, as if he wanted to hear everything I had to say. His attention was too consuming for me to ignore, and the more I tried to downplay it, the stronger it became. There was this one afternoon when he came by to discuss some marketing strategies with my mom. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard him arrive. My heart rate spiked as I heard his voice carry through the hallway, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for him to walk through the door. And when he did, I could feel the moment before our eyes met. It was as though the space between us held an invisible thread. He smiled at me, that same knowing, almost teasing smile, but it didn't feel playful. It felt deeper, more intense. "You're making lunch?" he asked casually, as though we were the only two people in the room. My mom was just a few feet away, but somehow, at that moment, I felt like it was just me and him. I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Yeah, just something quick." I didn't trust myself to say much more, not with the way his eyes were studying me. I could feel the pull again, the magnetic attraction that had been building between us. And this time, it was impossible to deny. I was becoming more aware of how often I looked for him, how I could feel the anticipation building each time he entered the room. It was as if my body recognized him before my mind could catch up, and the urge to be near him was becoming a constant hum in the back of my mind. Later that evening, when I was alone in my room, I found myself replaying every word, every look, every subtle touch we had exchanged. The way his fingers brushed against mine when he handed me a glass of water earlier in the day. The way his voice dipped when he asked if I'd had a good day. It felt too personal, too intimate for something that should have been strictly professional. And yet, every moment I spent with him left me craving more. I started to imagine things, what it would feel like if he wasn't just my mom's partner, but something more, something forbidden. The thought was intoxicating. He was older, experienced, with an energy that made him seem almost untouchable. But in my mind, none of that mattered. I wanted him, and the more I tried to fight it, the more I realized how uncontrollable the obsession had become. Here's Keynote 4, expanded to approximately 500 words for "He was my mom's business partner and my secret obsession." ####Keynote 4. The aftermath, the kiss hung in the air between us long after we broke apart. Time seemed to slow down, each heartbeat ringing in my ears. I felt both elated and terrified, my body trembling as if it had just been awakened from a long, deep sleep. But as reality began to settle back in, so did the overwhelming weight of what had just happened. Evan didn't say anything at first, and neither did I. We just stood there, the silence between us louder than any words could be. His hand was still resting lightly on my waist, but it felt like a world away. What had we done? This wasn't a simple mistake, something that could be brushed off. It felt different, intense, as though it had been building for longer than I cared to admit. For a moment, I wanted to pull away, to stop it before it went too far, but something stopped me. It was as if I had already crossed a threshold, and there was no returning from it. My thoughts were racing, swirling with a mixture of guilt and excitement, the adrenaline still pulsing through me. Evan started, his voice rough, but before he could finish, I cut him off. "Don't," I whispered, stepping back slightly, trying to regain control of the situation. "We can't do this." But even as I said the words, I knew they were meaningless. The truth was, I wanted this. I wanted him. And the way he was looking at me now, his eyes darkened, filled with that same desire that had been simmering between us all along, told me that he wanted it, too. He exhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling with each breath. "I know, but that doesn't change what just happened, does it?" His voice was steady, but there was a hint of something underneath, something raw, something desperate. I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. Instead, I looked away, my mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. I should have stopped it. I should have pushed him away, told him this was wrong, that I was his business partner's daughter, that this was an incredibly dangerous line to cross. But all those reasons felt distant and irrelevant in that moment. What mattered was the undeniable chemistry between us, the way our bodies had gravitated toward each other, as if we couldn't help it. "What now?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile bubble we were now trapped in. The question hung between us, and I could feel the tension thickening in the room. Evan took a step back, running a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. I don't know. He paused, looking me over with an intensity that made my heart race. But I do know one thing. This doesn't feel like something we can ignore. His words hit me harder than I expected. He was right. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself that what I felt for him was just some fleeting attraction, something that would fade with time. But now, with the taste of his lips still on mine and the heat of his body so close to mine, I knew it was deeper than that. This wasn't something that would simply fade. Your mom, I murmured, my thoughts racing. What do we tell her? He let out a bitter laugh, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. Nothing. Not yet, at least. I don't even know what this is, but I know we can't bring her into this right now. I swallowed hard, the weight of the situation sinking in. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell anyone. It felt like a secret too big to keep, but too dangerous to share. I had just crossed a line, and there was no easy way to undo it. But it wasn't just about keeping it a secret anymore. It was about the consequences, the risk. We were treading dangerous waters, and I didn't know how deep this would go, but I already knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. Here's Keynote 5 expanded to approximately 500 words for "He was my mom's business partner and my secret obsession." Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag Keynote 5. The tension escalates in the days following that kiss. The unspoken tension between Evan and me seemed to grow exponentially. Every time we saw each other, it was like a silent dance, a game of pretending nothing had changed when everything had. It felt as if we were walking on eggshells, trying to keep our worlds from colliding. Yet at the same time, both of us were aching for the inevitable explosion. I couldn't stop thinking about him. My thoughts were consumed with what had happened, replaying the moment over and over again in my head. The taste of his lips, the way he held me. Everything felt so real, yet so forbidden. The guilt gnawed at me, especially when I saw my mom. She had no idea what had transpired between us, and I could see the way she trusted him. She had no clue that I was now keeping the biggest secret of my life from her. It made me sick, but it also made everything feel even more intense, more urgent. Evan, too, seemed to be struggling with the weight of it. He would barely meet my eyes when we were around others, and when we were alone, there was always a distance between us. It wasn't that he didn't want me. It was the exact opposite. But he was trying to keep everything professional, trying to maintain control. And I hated it. I hated the fact that we had crossed this line, yet he was acting like it never happened. I needed him to acknowledge what we had. I needed him to act like something had changed between us, but instead, he acted like he was a stranger again, polite, distant, the man my mom admired. The man I couldn't have. One evening, after another tense meeting at the office, I found myself standing in the doorway of the kitchen, watching as Evan and my mom spoke quietly, discussing plans for their upcoming project launch. I hadn't meant to overhear them, but I couldn't help myself. The way he spoke to her, with such admiration and respect, it only reminded me of how much I wanted him, how much I longed for something more than the simple, professional exchanges we had in front of her. The air between Evan and me was thick. Every time I saw him, every time our paths crossed, the desire was so palpable it almost felt suffocating. He was impossible to ignore, but I also knew that I was dangerous to him, and he was dangerous to me. The more I craved him, the more I realized just how risky this all was. One evening, after dinner, when my mom had gone to bed early for an important meeting the next day, I found myself sitting alone in the living room. I was distracted, unable to focus on anything other than the storm of thoughts swirling inside my head. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, Evan was standing there, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a hint of something darker, something dangerous. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low and urgent. I didn't ask questions. I stepped aside and let him in. As soon as the door closed behind him, I could feel the air between us shift. He was standing a little too close. His presence was overpowering, his energy pulling me in despite the warning bells going off in my head. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his voice rougher than usual. There was no more pretense, no more distance between us. He was being honest now, bare, vulnerable, and I felt every word like a jolt to my chest. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and looked away. Evan, we can't do this. We both know it's wrong. I know, he said quietly, stepping even closer, his body just inches from mine. But it's already happened. I've already crossed the line, and I can't pretend it didn't mean anything. The room was charged with energy, every nerve in my body on high alert as I stared up at him. I could feel the heat radiating off him, the tension palpable. And despite everything I knew, despite the fact that I was about to betray my mother's trust, that I was about to lose everything I had, I couldn't pull away. Not from him. Not from this. His fingers grazed my cheek, and the touch was enough to send a wave of heat through me. For a split second, I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to stop, to think about the consequences. But then, before I could stop myself, I kissed him again. This time it was different. It was more desperate, more needy. I couldn't contain it anymore. The obsession, the longing, it was all too much. But the moment our lips met, I knew this was it. There was no turning back now. Here's Keynote 6 expanded to approximately 500 words for he was my mom's business partner and my secret obsession. Hashtag, 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 Keynote 6. The fallout begins. The aftermath of that kiss was like a storm that I couldn't outrun, no matter how fast I ran. The days that followed felt like I was trapped in a whirlwind, spinning out of control. Evan and I had crossed a line, one that neither of us could pretend had not been crossed. But now, the reality of it was crashing down on me. Every glance we exchanged, every word that left our mouths felt like a delicate balance, teetering between the safety of pretending nothing had changed and the reckless desire to tear down every boundary we had. At first, we tried to act like nothing was different. We kept our interactions professional, cold, like we hadn't just crossed a line that could destroy everything. But it was impossible to ignore the growing tension, the way our bodies seemed to gravitate toward each other even when we weren't saying a word. Every time he walked into a room, my heart would race, and I'd feel that magnetic pull that was becoming harder and harder to resist. I could feel the way he was struggling, too. Every time we were alone, the air between us would grow heavy, like there was something unsaid, something we both knew was there, but couldn't speak aloud. And yet, even in those moments, he would pull away, almost as if he was trying to convince himself that it was better to keep things as they were. But I wasn't so sure anymore. I didn't want to keep pretending. I didn't want to keep hiding what had begun to feel so real between us. And then the consequences started creeping in. It wasn't just the tension between us that began to grow unbearable. It was the consequences of our actions that started to seep into every part of my life. I hadn't noticed it at first, but the moment Evan and I had kissed, I'd become a different person in my mother's eyes. She hadn't said anything outright, but I could feel the distance between us growing. The once easy conversations between us had started to feel strained, like I was hiding something she couldn't put her finger on. Her questions became more pointed, her eyes more watchful. I couldn't blame her for it. Something had changed in me, and it was only a matter of time before she noticed. One night, after a tense dinner where I barely touched my food, my mom finally confronted me. We were alone in the living room, and she looked at me with those sharp, knowing eyes. I felt like she could see right through me. "Is there something you're not telling me?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. I froze. It was like she could smell the guilt on me. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My mind was a jumbled mess. I wanted to lie, to tell her everything was fine, but the words stuck in my throat. "You've been acting distant lately," she continued. "You're hiding something. Is it work? Is it Evan?" Her mention of Evan made my stomach twist. It was like she already knew. I quickly tried to cover it up. "No, Mom, I'm fine. Just tired," I said, my voice unconvincing. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. But she wasn't fooled. Her expression softened slightly, but the suspicion in her eyes remained. She didn't push further, but I could tell that she wasn't going to let this go. I had to get a grip fast. The next day, I met Evan at the office, and the tension was unbearable. I could feel the weight of my mother's gaze, the knowingness in her tone from the night before, and the knowledge that every second spent around him was one step closer to everything being exposed. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't lose everything. But Evan seemed distant, almost cold, and I knew why. He was pulling away. Asterisk again, star. I watched him, trying to understand what was going through his head, but the more I tried to connect with him, the more he retreated. It felt like he was pushing me to make the first move, to be the one to say that we couldn't do this anymore. But I couldn't do that. I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything. Later that evening, when the office was nearly empty, Evan and I stood alone in the conference room. The door was shut, and the silence between us was deafening. I could feel his frustration radiating off him as he ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. "I don't know if this is a mistake," he said quietly, his voice strained, "but I don't know how to keep doing this." I swallowed, my heart pounding. "Then don't," I replied, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "But you know as well as I do, we can't just undo this. Not now." His eyes darkened, his gaze unwavering. "So what are we supposed to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no answer. We were both stuck, trapped by our own desires and the consequences of our actions. As I stared back at him, I realized we were standing at the edge of a cliff, and neither of us knew how far we were willing to fall. Here's Keynote 7 expanded to approximately 500 words for "He was my mom's business partner and my secret obsession." ####Keynote 7. The breaking point, the moment had come, the point of no return. We had been walking a razor-thin line for so long that I could feel the edges starting to splinter beneath my feet. Every day, the weight of our secret became more suffocating, and with each passing hour, the possibility of everything unraveling grew stronger. I had known it would eventually come to this. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and our entire world would collapse. It all started that morning. I woke up to the familiar tension in my chest, the constant gnawing sense that something was wrong. It wasn't just the usual anxiety of dealing with a secret that was slowly eating away at me. It was the realization that I was no longer in control of my own life. I had let this obsession with Evan consume me, and now it felt like there was no way out. The reality of what I'd done, what we'd done, was starting to settle in, and the consequences were no longer something I could ignore. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Evan, short and to the point. Asterisk, we need to talk. Now. Asterisk, my stomach churned as I read it. I had been expecting this, and yet a part of me wasn't ready for it. I knew what it meant. It meant we couldn't keep pretending. It meant the truth was about to come to light. And with it, everything I had worked so hard to protect, my relationship with my mom, my future, everything was on the line. I tried to shake off the dread that was settling over me as I made my way to the office. The air felt thick with uncertainty. The familiar hum of the building, the distant chatter of co-workers, everything seemed muted as I walked through the hallways, my mind consumed with thoughts of what was about to happen. I reached the conference room where Evan had asked to meet me, and my heart skipped a beat as I pushed the door open. Evan was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out over the city. He didn't turn around when I entered, and for a moment, we both just stood there in silence. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, the sense that we were standing at the precipice of something irreversible. "I don't think we can keep doing this," Evan said, his voice low, as if he were weighing every word before it left his mouth. He turned to face me then, his expression unreadable. There was no heat in his gaze anymore, no spark of the passion that had been there before. Just cold, clinical distance. I swallowed hard. The words I wanted to say caught in my throat. This wasn't what I had imagined. I had thought that somehow we could make it work, that maybe we could push past the complications and the guilt. But now, standing in front of him, I realized I had been fooling myself. He was pulling away, and I was powerless to stop it. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. My eyes flickered to the ground, unable to meet his. "But I don't know how to stop, how to pretend this didn't happen." Evan's jaw tightened, and he took a step toward me, his gaze softening for a moment before hardening again. "You have to stop. We both do. This, whatever this is, it's not real. It's just a moment, a mistake. We can't let it ruin everything." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I wanted to scream at him, tell him he was wrong, that what we shared wasn't just a mistake, that it was something more. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was a part of me that knew he was right. This wasn't just a fling or a passing attraction. It was something deeper, something more dangerous, and I knew it had the power to tear apart everything I cared about. My chest ached as I fought to hold back tears. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice cracking. Evan took another step closer, and for a moment, I thought he might reach out to me, that he might break through the walls he'd so carefully built between us. But instead, he looked at me with an unreadable expression. "We go back to how things were before," he said, his words sharp and final. "We end this, and we pretend it never happened." His words fell like a knife to my chest. I wanted to argue, to tell him that this was not something I could just forget, but I knew, deep down, that I had no choice. We were both trapped by the choices we had made. We were both caught in a web of our own making, and now there was no escape. "I can't just forget," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "I know," he said, his gaze softening for a moment. "But we have to try." The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, both of us broken in our own way, both of us knowing that the bond we had shared was now shattered beyond repair. And yet, as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something between us, something that neither of us was willing to let go of. But it didn't matter. The damage had been done, and now we had to live with the consequences.